There's something about the Pony Express.
The schedule wide open again, Roy.
I nearly got busted wide open myself. The car was right on the North Fork.
Be careful.
I'll be seeing you.
That's enamored people, generation
Wild Bill.
after generation.
This here Pony Express is 2,000 miles from St. Joe, Missouri, all the way to Sacramento, California.
After generation.
There's a group, the National Pony Express Association. Every year, they recreate the route. The thing that I love about that group especially is that they get so many kids excited about history.
Not only was the Pony Express route nearly 2,000 miles from St. Joseph, Missouri to Sacramento, California, it's over rough terrain. And from 1860 to 1861, Pony Express riders managed to travel it in just 10 days.
This 10 days was like revolutionary. It was like us getting internet. The riders themselves, they're riding 80, 90, 100 miles, at a shot, and roughly, it works out to roughly 8 miles an hour. You're out there alone. You're in the desert. There's quicksand. There's mountains. I've gone over the route a couple times now. And there are mountains in a car. You're up like this. It's like, ay, ay, ay.
New York Times bestselling author Jim DeFelice, who you might recognize from co-authoring the book turned blockbuster American Sniper, is one of those who was captivated by the Pony Express at a young age.
I loved the whole thing, and I kind of, in some ways, planted the seeds, not just for this book and for learning about the Old West, but for all history.
His excitement for the legends of the West leaps off the pages of his new title, West Like Lightning, with iconic characters like Wild Bill Hickok, Buffalo Bill Cody, and even Mark Twain. But the Pony Express's fascinating history is short, just 18 tumultuous months.
It's right at the start of the Civil War, and by writing about it, I could write about what was happening in America, the conflict, the war that's coming, the technology, the telegraph. There's the trains. There's phenomenal advances in weaponry.
DeFelice didn't just rely on old archives for researching this book. He drove and hiked the route himself.
I did get lost, and it was either in southern Nevada or southeastern Nevada or southwestern Utah. If I knew exactly where it was, I wouldn't have been lost.
Along the way, he made some interesting discoveries. For example, that's an ear famously posted by the Pony Express's Jack Slade.
He had one rule in life, I guess I should point out, and his rule was never, ever, ever drink while you're sleeping. Otherwise, what the hey.
That tale and many others about the Pony Express's colorful riders and owners, its ultimate downfall, and even the possible invention of the donut.
That's my favorite story. Come on.
Next, in this entertaining first-person one-on-one with author Jim DeFelice, presented by St. Louis County Library and HEC TV.
Jim DeFelice, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
We're here at the Magnolia Hotel, which is downtown St. Louis, right across from the old post office.
Very appropriate.
It is appropriate.
It is.
Talk more about that.
When I was a kid, and one of the things that kind of kindled my initial interest were stories about the Pony Express, but you also learn a lot about St. Louis as the gateway to the West. And as I was thinking about working on the book and starting, okay, well, the book is going to start in St. Louis because that would have to be where the Pony Express would be because it's the West. And then come to find out, it wasn't. And in doing the research and finding out about the Pony Express and finding out about why they didn't choose St. Louis, it really kind of opened things up for me to understand more about the Pony Express. One of the reasons that St. Louis was not the start had to do with the fact that they wanted to deliver the mail in 10 days from wherever they were. And St. Louis was a little bit further. Okay, that makes sense. And they wanted a railroad. Okay, that kind of made sense. But then as you read the contracts and you start finding out about the guys, the characters really, who started the Pony Express, who owned it, you find out that these guys were actually really, really, well, we'll call them smart business people. Basically, they put all of the towns on both sides of the river in competition. So St. Joe's, which was a relatively small town at the time, put together a really, really attractive package. And the only thing is that when you look at St. Joe's, it's actually on the east side of the Missouri River. So the riders would race out of the terminus, which was a really nice building, and the stables are still there. They're a museum now, to the Pony Express. They'd race down the hill, and it's quite a steep hill, and they would go stampeding down. And then they would stop and wait for the ferry to come. I mean, what's that about? Well, it's about the great deal that the owners got with the city of St. Joe.
One of the things that I think is so interesting about the Pony Express is for as much work as it took, as much as expenses, investment went into it, because it was quite a large sum of money.
Oh, and they were losing money every day. Every hour they were losing, hundreds of dollars an hour. But the idea, see, was that there's three owners, and William Russell is kind of the idea man, we'll call him, but also the financier, and he's handling all the political connections. He had two goals. One was publicity, and he wanted everyone to know the Pony Express, and by extension, the company that owned the Pony Express. That worked. People were gaga over the thing. I mean, it was just a phenomena there, because it used to take mail months to get even from St. Joe's, let alone, say, back east in New York City or Washington or wherever, Chicago. It would take, it would have to go either by steamer, which would take months, or if it went by stagecoach, it would still take, again, a couple of months, and sometimes would make it, sometimes not. But this 10 days was like revolutionary. It was like us getting internet, really. Right. So that really worked. His other idea was to get $1 million contract from the federal government to deliver the mail. That didn't work out quite as well, because even congressmen, let's say you've given them incentives to do the deal, even so, their promises in 1859 and 1860 are probably worth about as much as they are now.
I think it was like some $700,000 invested in getting this going.
It's hard exactly to say, but it's at least that, because what they're doing is they're putting it on the infrastructure that they already have with stagecoaches, a lot of the offices they had. So they're putting $700,000 in, and that's, by the way, that's when money was really money.
Right, 1860
wow,
money.
That's real money. They have stores, they have a bank, they want an empire. Russell wants, basically, if you have any information that you want to get to California, or essentially west of the Missouri River, he wants you to be dealing with his company, whether it's information in the form of mail, people, through stagecoaches, freight, military supplies, whatever it is. And, his vision was huge. And the truth is, it may sound a little bit grandiose now, but American Express, which was a New York company, had done exactly the same thing back east when the Erie Canal started. And there's another company that that was their competitor in very direct and indirect ways, and that's still with us. It's called Wells Fargo.
Back to my original thought, all that investment, all the horses, all the stagecoaches, all of that, it only lasted 18 months.
No, 18 months.
Right?
Well, Russell knew it wasn't going to last forever. And I think he's probably counting on that because they're losing so much money.
Right.
But he figures, okay, it's kind of like a loss leader. Let me my eyes are on that entire empire that I'm going to create. I'm going to use the telegraph, and he did. I'm going to use the railroads, and he did. And I'm going to make money on this vast this vast idea. At some point, the idea kind of got beyond him. But he was the kind of guy who wouldn't let ethics get in the way of business.
Some little problem there. I mean, that's basically what led to the ultimate downfall.
Unfortunately, he has to pay his bills, and he starts out by promising to pay, by borrowing money, by promising to pay from contracts that he already has, which is fine, you know, unless you promise the same person to pay off the same, $10,000 that you're going to get. Sooner or later, it adds up. And, it kind of snowballed. He got into more and more trouble. And he ends up, and I go into the details, obviously, in West Like Lightning in the book, but he ends up with bonds from the government that the government doesn't really own. And he's trying to try to get money off of those. And unfortunately, sooner or later, it was going to collapse, and it did in a big way.
It just all catches up with him.
Unfortunately for him.
And yet, the Pony Express is iconic. Do you think that's thanks in large part to the Pony Express writer who never was a writer?
Well, that's true. Well, I think that one thing we shouldn't get away from is that the writers themselves, the 19-year-olds, 20, 21, I think one was a little bit older, but they're all relatively young men. And when you look at what they did, they're riding 80, 90, 100 miles, at a shot, and roughly, it works out to roughly 8 miles an hour. So they're on the saddle for 10, 12 hours, in all sorts of weather, at night, during the day, in a blizzard. They don't have too many Indian problems, to be honest, but, you never know. You're out there alone. You're in the desert. There's quicksand. There's mountains that, I've gone over the route a couple of times now, and there are mountains in a car you're up like this, and it's like, ay, 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 and even walking some of the stretches, it's like, well, where's the road? There's no real road here. And you think back, 150 years ago or so, it's like, wow, it's incredible. So what they did was incredible. And then, of course, we have the greatest Pony Express rider of all time, a phenomenal, best rider ever in Buffalo Bill Cody. There is a slight problem with that in that, come to find out as you do a little research, well, Buffalo Bill actually didn't ride for the Pony Express, but he's...
Details.
Yeah, details. What he did, though, he is the most important rider,
yeah.
In that he, towards the end of the century, he starts these fantastic shows, the Wild West show, and it's kind of like they're phenomenal expositions, and they do them in big theaters everywhere, really. New York, London, they go over to Europe, and even the shows inside start. You have horses out. You have horses on stage, come out on stage, Indians, guns shooting off. It's a lot of fun. It's a great show. I'm sorry I missed them, but
you can imagine.
But I can imagine.
Yeah.
And even when there were phenomenal hits in New York and in Europe, and even when they would come to small towns, it's like the Super Bowl coming to your town. So everybody knew about it, and the shows would always. The shows would either start or end, and often both, with a little vignette of the Pony Express. And so, so people all of a sudden, the Pony Express, which had been famous in its time, and then you have the Civil War, you have a lot of other things going on, and all of a sudden it's back, and it's associated with this good feeling about when we were pioneers. Because remember, in the 1890s and 1900s, the frontier really is kind of closing down. And just like we talk about the greatest generation from World War II, well, the pony generation, if you will, they're looking at it as the same way. And the pony comes to embody, rightly, a lot of the legends that, a lot of the things that we associate with being Americans, individualism, just surviving against the elements. All these things are true, but the stories kind of remind us of kind of our birthright, really. And that's one reason, or another reason, I should say, that they kind of continue, and it continues to be so popular.
I know you write about how there are so many tall tales, legends
There's a couple.
in the research. It had to have been hard to try to separate, which you try to do in your book, fact from fiction, because there weren't any Pony Express records left, right?
No, well, some of what alleged were the records were lost in a very convenient fire. But there's a lot of little museums that have preserved their history. And, you know, whether it's a diary or a newspaper account, or in some cases, you know, an oral history, not of the pony rider himself, but of, you know, the grandpa said this, or, you know, my great-grandmother was there. In researching it, I was so fortunate. I went to a lot of them, and, you know, I would just, in most cases, just drop in. And the people were, I mean, they were phenomenal. They would, oh, yo, come look at this. I mean, I must have seen, I can't tell you how many colts I've saw that won the West, you know. But it's just phenomenal. They were so giving of their time and information. I couldn't have done the book without them.
A lot of those stories, you know, that you learned about, I mean, like we said, trying to separate fact from fiction, some of them, they're just too good that you want them to be, like, the one about the donut?
That's my favorite story. Come on. Now, all right, you may say, some may say, that, yeah, maybe that's not really how it happened. But, you know, the story, there's one of the most famous riders was a young man who rode in the Kansas area in Missouri. He was a young guy, 19 years old. Now, you have to remember, these guys are in phenomenal shape, okay, going through a lot of stress. Just to be able to do that for, you know, for 10 or 12 hours is just phenomenal. He usually had 2 runs a week, roughly, through almost the entire 18 months. So physically, it's very demanding, and of course that, you know, produces a, you know, kind of a physique. They were also making about $100 a month, which was, you know, that's back when money was money,
right.
And that's a lot of money. So they were well. If you were a young lady in that area, you might be interested in hooking up with the fellow.
These are, I mean, they're rock stars.
They're the rock stars of the time, you know, absolutely, and you know, and they've got money, and they really don't have that much opportunity to spend the money, so they're even better catches.
Right.
And as the story goes, there were a lot of young ladies in the Kansas area. And, you know, they were trying to attract Johnny's attention. And, you know, one of the best ways then and now to get a young man's, any man's attention is through his stomach. And, you know, they supposedly would, you know, they would cook something for him, bake something, and of course Johnny, being a devoted Pony Express rider, you know, he wouldn't stop. He might try and grab it. Well, now there's a young lady, as the story goes, we'll call her Becky for protect her identity, and she was a great baker, and she would bake crullers, which, you know, they're those kind of long donuts, and you know, very good for dunking. They're excellent for dunking in your coffee. I can attest to that. However, they're not that good. You might be able to grab them, but they're hard to ride on the pony because, you know, your hands have to hold on the reins. Well, according to the story, according to legend, she one day got the bright idea to take the cruller and turn it into a donut. So Johnny, you know, he'd be able to put the donut around his finger and, you know, eat it as he rode. I mean, that's how we got donuts. Thank goodness for Johnny. I mean, I owe him personally, you know, just so much, because if it weren't for that, and Becky too, of course, because she invented it. But, you know, the thing is, and I understand that story especially, you might look, well, I don't know if that story is true or not. But the thing about the Pony Express and, you know, the legends that, you know, whether they're necessarily true on the surface, what I've come to realize is that even the ones that maybe the surface details are way off, they're still telling us a lot about the people who were repeating them and why they're important to us today. I mean, those things that we celebrate about, you know, individualism and, you know, heroism, really. You know, again, it's really our birthright. And so in the book, I don't want to just tear those stories down. I want to celebrate them because they are important to us. They do tell us a lot about who we are, and who, not only who we are, but who we want to be.
You mentioned the research trip that you did. And so as you made this journey, I know you got lost, maybe got lost once?
I did get lost. I did get lost once. And either in, now I have to say, I did go off the trails. I wanted to see why the trail was in a certain spot. So in my own defense, I did get lost, and it was either in southern Nevada or southeastern Nevada or southwestern Utah. If I knew exactly where it was, I wouldn't have been lost.
Exactly.
Right? So.
Was there anything on that trip that really stuck out to you?
There's a place called Julesburg, a very cool place, and it's associated with one of the more colorful, shall we say, characters named Jack Slade, who he wasn't a rider, but he was a station master. He was also a little bit of a troubleshooter in setting up the line. And Jack, there, as they were setting up the line, there was a problem in the company. They kept losing horses. And, you know, they're paying a lot of money for the horses, at times $300 a pop, which is a lot for a horse. Even then, you know, again, you have to kind of adjust that, put some zeros behind that. You know, so they sent Jack out to figure out what was going on. Now, Jack was very famous already for. Well, he had one rule in life, I guess I should point out, and his rule was never, ever, ever drink while you're sleeping. Otherwise, what the hey. He was so famous that he's actually a character in Mark Twain's Roughing It. But anyway, Jack Slade goes to the home station and does a little investigating around, and you know, come to find out, all of these, there's a whole bunch of horses that, you know, look like they belonged to the Pony Express company, or the parent company, and they happen to be at the ranch of one of the fellows who runs the home station. Well, oh my goodness, what's going on here, said Jack Slade, probably not in those exact words. And again, there's a lot more to the story, and I do have it in West Like Lightning, but the end result was that Jack ended up using the fellow as target practice. And, you know, after Jack was done, the one intact piece of his carcass, shall we say, was his ear. And Jack hammered his ear to a fence post. And, you know, it's funny to say, there were never, ever any problems with horses disappearing in that area afterwards. Well, while I was there, there's a fence post, and I look on the fence post, and what's there but an ear? I'm like, wow. I did not have the guts to touch the ear and see if it was plastic or real. I assumed that, you know, some local wag, a historical person, did that, and but that's the kind of like little touch that, you know, somebody that really knows the history and has a little bit of a sense of humor, and I tried to convey some of that sense of humor in the book in telling the stories.
When you were younger, a child, were you a fan of the Westerns and the Old West?
Oh, can I think back that old? I loved it. I loved and everything. I mean, from from the early stories about, and they're old, about what the Pony Express riders did, to the more to movies, say like even movies, serious movies like High Noon, that sort of thing. But also the fun, silly stuff, all the way down to like F Troop, which was a lot of fun. And obviously that's not it's about as close to history as a $3 bill is, but
right.
But I loved the whole thing, and that kind of in some ways planted the seeds, not just for for this book and for learning about the Old West, but for all history.
People might recognize your name because of a movie that was very popular, blockbuster, American Sniper.
That's true.
Which you co-authored.
I had written the book with Chris, right?
With Chris, yeah. The man who
Chris Kyle, yeah.
Who the story's about.
Right, absolutely.
Did because of this success, I mean, the awards and everything that went along with that, I mean, it was a New York Times bestseller for 37
forever,
weeks
for a ridiculous number of times.
After
weeks.
that, did your life change? Did anything change for you?
Well, first of all, to do a book like that, you become pretty close. I spent a lot of time with Chris and his wife, Taya. They came up, spent a lot of time with us as we were working on the book. And so, you become friends. And unfortunately with that book, because Chris was murdered, there's a lot of emotion tied in there. As far as the movie goes, I have to say, Bradley Cooper did, first of all, Bradley's a phenomenal guy. He doesn't get publicity for the non-film stuff that he does. And the reason that Chris chose him actually to option the movie, because we had lots of people wanting to do the movie, but Bradley has done a lot for veterans, as well as other people, and people don't really know that. He doesn't want publicity about it. He'll probably shoot me for saying this, but I have to say, Bradley Cooper, who is a phenomenal actor, he doesn't really look like Chris. But the first time I saw the trailer, and showed me the trailer, it's like, oh, that's Chris. I mean, he had all of his mannerisms down. He had studied him, and he had just become Chris Kyle. And it was spooky, phenomenal, inspiring, and a little spooky. That's how good he was. He was really, really good. And he never met Chris either. They had spoken over the phone. But unfortunately, Chris was murdered before Bradley actually acted in the movie.
And you worked with Taya to write American Wife.
I did. We wrote American Wife. We're working actually on a new book, kind of as we speak. We're trying to highlight a lot of the things that everyday Americans have done to improve their communities, and so we've got a whole range of stories. We have everything from 6 or 7 year old who went trick-or-treating for a food bank and got his entire town, a small town, but it got the entire town involved, all the way up to a woman who helped start the American college, or university, excuse me, in Afghanistan.
Wow. Inspiring people.
Yeah, it's just great. I mean, and boy, talk about humbling. You're talking to a 6-year-old who's like doing all this. It's like, wow, what did I do, man? Especially when I was 6. I was watching TV. I was watching F Troop or whatever, whatever it was. But it's really inspiring, and it really brought home the American spirit and how much it's still alive today.
The American spirit seems to be a topic DeFelice enjoys writing about, and we can't seem to get enough of either. Remember all those old westerns about the Pony Express? West Like Lightning could soon follow suit.
There's so much cool stuff that happened in the Pony Express. We're hoping to do a limited series with it. The pony flashed briefly across the American landscape, a strike of lightning in a sky often dark with danger and ambiguity. In its history, real and sometimes imagined, we see ourselves as we'd like to be, brave, resourceful, racing against nature and all manner of dangers, with determination in our hearts and a smile on our faces.